Okay, perfect. Thank you guys for coming. Today, the topic of our webinar is passed pawn strength, and we are going to talk about how the passed pawn affects the actions that are taken in the game. So, well, if you have a passed pawn and at the same time you are a few pawns down, it still can be a winning position for you because two passed pawns are, because a passed pawn can be stronger because it ties enemy pieces to that pawn, and that's why they cannot initiate immediate actions. Okay, so yeah, of course, we are waiting for more people to join us. I only see a few participants. Guys, you can unmute your microphone if you want, but make sure there is no background noise. If you want to ask anything, you can either type in the chat or you can unmute your microphone and then say it. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So what you need to know about the passed pawns? Well, we usually got used to the passed pawns in the end game, but even in the middle game and during the tactical fight, the passed pawn is quite important. Well, having in mind that when you promote the pawn, it provides you with a new queen, which costs 9 or 10 pawns, means that in order to promote, you may initiate some sacrifices. And the idea of these sacrifices can be either just an exchange of the pieces that can potentially stop this passed pawn, or just distraction of the king that can stop it. A passed pawn, together with such pieces like a knight and a rook, may create a mating net that you can take advantage of. Also, it's very often when a passed pawn is combined to the with the attack on the enemy king. The main idea, as I said, is to distract enemy pieces, so get them tied down to the pawn. After which, it's possible to more focus on the attack. Well, I'll show you a few examples. We have 3 games today, and in some of these games, the attack was initiated. Okay, so people are joining. It's 11 a.m. in New York, so let's start. The first game I would like to talk about is the game between Boris Spassky and Tigran Petrosyan. The opening is not so important for us. It was Queen's Gambit, and Tarrasch defense. c5 was played. C takes d5, knight takes d5, because black didn't want to capture with the pawn and end up with an isolated pawn. So knight d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, c takes d4, c takes d4, and white got a strong pawn center. So which, well, usually you can get a similar position in Grunfeld, but then the bishop is on g7. And the pawn is on c5, the white pawn is on c3, and this pawn is on e7, which provides black with a good idea of doing bishop g4. This time the bishop is restricted, and I would say that this is, this strategy for black comparing to Grunfeld is definitely worse. However, people still play this opening, bishop d2, bishop b4, bishop d2. So maybe doing queen e5 could make more sense, but if you look deeply, the bishop is hanging, the queens are exchanged. Look at this position. White is developed and black is not. So the endgame for white is definitely better. So they took on d2 right away, queen to d2, and in order to speed up castling, to speed up their development, they castled. Bishop c4, knight c6, castle, and b6. So maybe it makes sense to play this move, then bring the other rook to d1, but white continued with this. Black reacted with bishop b7, rook f e1, rook c8. Okay. So, okay, so now the quality of my sound isn't so good. Let me. So my microphone got disconnected. Let me quickly fix it. Okay, so I'm back again, and now everything should work according to what I see. Please. Okay, yeah, it looks like now it's better. My microphone works. So guys, if you have any background noise, please mute yourself and unmute you when you have a question. So here White has 2 pawns in the center comparing to the pawn on e6 for black. What do you think about d5? So does d5 make sense in this position? Should we play it? But then black is likely to take this pawn, and if that happens, what can you say about the position? So d5, should we play d5 or not? What do you think? Okay, so John suggests bishop f1 first, because he doesn't want to play against knight a5. Well, I partially agree with you. This is a good idea. However, I'll show you what happens if knight a5 is played after d5. Okay, fine. Well, guys, if you want, you can unmute yourself, and if your microphone is good enough, just say what you think. So we are doing this webinar this time through Zoom. Well, it may work better than it usually works when I stream on Chesslands and as well as on YouTube and Twitch, but we'll see. So, uh, should we play d5 or not? John said that bishop f1 should be played in advance. So, John, well, prophylaxis does make sense, but you may spend too many on prophylaxis, and finally you may not succeed with your original plan because your opponent will do something that stops you to come up with your original idea. That's why if you can play d5 without any prophylaxis, play d5 right away. If you think that after d5 your position becomes worse than it is now, then yes, you have to do some prophylaxis. Okay, so here, well, bishop f1 definitely deserves attention, but I think they will continue with knight a5 anyway. And then after this move, maybe they take, and then they continue with knight c4. If you take this knight, it's fine. But if not, then they locate their knight on d6. So white played d5 immediately, and this is a good move. And as here John said, the best reaction here was to continue with knight a5. What now? Well, there was another game played by Spassky, if I'm not mistaken, where he played this move, and after e takes d5, he played d5 and initiated a strong attack. There are actually several games in this position. So it's quite a playable option. You are down a pawn, but you get a very good spot for the knight, and you can focus on the attack of h7 here, because these pieces are out of the game, even if your opponent continues with knight c4. So knight c4, for example, queen f4, knight b2, and bishop h7, king h7, knight g5, king goes to g6, and h4. So you can even sacrifice the rook. So they exchange in this case, but having in mind that you already sacrificed the bishop, so you'll be down a rook, but then it's a very strong attack. And actually, the only way to save here for black is to continue with rook c4. Then the position is unclear, but white has a very strong attack. And in most of the games played in this position, so can you imagine there are at least 5 games played here, white, in 4 of them, white won. In one game ended in a draw. So that's why this idea with bishop d3, e5 definitely makes sense. And if not bishop d3, instead you can try to, so here after knight a5, instead of doing a bishop d3, you may take here. How does it work? If, for example, knight takes on c4, what would you play here? E takes f7. Yeah, e takes f7 works, because if the rook takes, you can capture on d8. I doubt that taking with the king is a good idea. Yeah, taking with the king doesn't look good because of several things. At least you have this, and after king g8, you have rook d8, and this rook is pinned, so your queen is not hanging. And if he does this move, you just simply have rook d7, and at least you capture it back, ending with several extra pawns. So this is not a good move, but after king h8, you can capture on d8. Rook c captures d8, rook d8, and it seems white is winning because of these 2 passed pawns. And in order to stop them, looks like black has to sacrifice a piece. So even if knight c4, it still works. So once again, so guys, and especially John. Yeah, thank you. If you can play d5 right away, you'd better play d5 right away, because bishop f1 is extra tempo that you allow your opponent to prepare for d5. If you think that d5 works directly and this counterattack isn't dangerous, well, it isn't dangerous because at least you have d takes e6 as well as bishop d3. Bishop d3, then e takes d5, and then e5. Okay, so here, after knight e5, d takes e6, we didn't talk about this move. However, I don't think this is a big issue because you can play this. If rook takes, then you take with the bishop and you are fine. Yeah, you are completely fine. So take rook d2. So it's extra exchange and how many? 1 extra pawn. So it's a completely winning. So king goes to h8. And here you continue with knight d2. And after they take on c4, again, it's e5, e6, and they have to give up the bishop. For example, bishop c8, e6. Now we promote, so they have to sacrifice it. And after g6, black may play for a draw. It seems to be equal. So this is the only way. If black finds it, then he can at least try to save his position. But remember that after knight a5, here you can always play this move and follow this strategy, which provides you with some winning chances. Okay, it was e takes d5, which is not the best way. This is the move that was played in the game. Well, this time e takes d5 with the pawn, creating a passed pawn, then knight a5, bishop goes to f1. maybe they can play knight c4 or queen d6 right away. And if in this position you decide to place your knight on e4, then queen h6 looks good. For example, if knight goes to e4, then the queens can be exchanged and they can try to stop the d6 pawn by locating the rook here. So if you play d6, then they first take on e4 and d6 pawn becomes a weakness. So getting a passed pawn with the bishop on f1 is unlikely to provide white with an advantage. That's the reason why white captures with the bishop. Knight goes to a5 anyway. So your turn. What do you think white should do in this position? So exactly, this is a good point from Liliana, that if we can play d5 right away, we don't need to play bishop f1 and spend a tempo on it.
I'd like to reposition the queen to f4.
Yeah, in this position, queen to f4 looks good because queen f4 creates a threat of any discovered attack. That's right. So queen f4, well, if they take, this time we can capture with the rook. So, well, it's quite powerful. I also think that we can capture with the pawn because then nothing can stop us from playing d6. There is no queen d6, no queen h6, no way to exchange the queens. So that's why it should be okay. So queen f4, queen c7, but queen f5. So who can tell me what are we threatening in this position? What is our next steps?
Bishop takes b7 and rook d7.
Yes, together with knight g5. I actually think that knight g5 right away seems to be a better way because you double attack here. Yeah, okay, then g6. So that's the reason why they exchange. But let's say if they do not exchange but continue with this move, then well, let's decide. Should we first take, or maybe should we first start with this? Well, I think we should first start with this, and after this move, we do this. Simply exchange everything, and then end up with extra exchange after this check. No, this is the reason. This is because they played knight c4. If the knight was here, he was defending here. But yes, knight g5 is still dangerous because after g6 you can simply play queen h3 and attack h7. So bishop d5 seems to be a must, and then e takes d5. This is where black played queen c2. Well, the idea of queen c2 is actually quite logical. With this move, they want to exchange of the queens and also attack the pawn on a2, having in mind that they can always play rook d8 and stop the d pawn, maybe knight c6 or knight b7 that protects, and the king goes there, so rook e8 won't be a possibility. For example, no, queen e4 was played in the game, but let's say queen c2, rook c2, and then d6. So here, let's say they play rook d8, d7. Then king f8. So how do we progress? Because a2 is a weakness and they can initiate their own attack. So that was their hope. But I also want you to understand that, well, if you have a passed pawn, but you see if you promote, it doesn't really help you to improve, then in the end game, you'd better first use the main principle, activate your pieces. So doing rook e7 would be a better way. Rook a2, rook a7. So materially it's equal. And now you can play d6. This knight is pinned to the rook. So here it makes more sense. And if, for example, king f8, I think you can start with knight e5 move. Yeah, knight e5 move. And if they play this move, you play knight d7 and take on b6. It should work. Because then the knight is hanging also. So, and if they play this move in order to protect on b6, you can just simply take here with the knight or with the rook. It's up to you. So with the rook on the 7th rank, you have a lot of activity, and the fact that they also have a pass pawn doesn't bother you in this case. So exchanging queens was still possible, but white played a better move, because now with the queen supporting the pawn, their task is not only to promote, but together with this queen, they have definitely more opportunities, because the queen and the knight together may create several tactical combinations. Queen a2, d5, rook c d8, everything seems to be quite logical here, but d7, and what then? So the plan is to get the rook to e7, to play this move or maybe this move and capture on f7 finally. Or just get it protected and play rook c8 move. Having the queen on f4 always means that black has to keep an eye on the f7 pawn. So queen c4, queen f5, knight g5 is coming. So that's why h6, but now rook c1 with a temper. The queen is defending on d7. So this queen goes to a6. Where else? Rook c7. So the queen is out of the game. So that's why in order to bring it, they play this move. Now I have a question for you. How would you play? So guys, I'm looking at the chat, and you can also turn your microphone on and suggest it by just saying it. Okay, so 95 was suggested by Brian. Okay, fine. Anything else?
G4.
G4 with the idea of doing an escape square?
Both escape square and G5.
G5. Well, I don't think you can benefit of G5, and maybe it's a bit slow. Maybe you can win right away here. So, well, I'm sure after G4, white is still better and maybe even winning. But there is a better way to take advantage of it.
Rook e8.
Rook e8. Yes, rook e8 deserves attention. Anything else?
Queen c5.
Well, queen, okay. Well, I don't see the point of queen c5. With the what? With the idea of doing rook c8 move? Probably,
Takes
actually.
a7, or yeah, potentially Queen
Rook
six F8.
c8. Yeah, rook c8. Well, rook c8 doesn't work still. We don't have
Oh,
enough
rook takes
attackers.
A7.
Ah, rook takes a7, trapping the queen. Well, it's not a trap, and they may react with this move. So well, it looks quite suspicious. 95 definitely is a possibility. You over you overlap your rook activity with this move. So knight d4 was played in the game with the idea of adding some pressure on b5 and also threatening c6 at some point. But actually, this is where Spassky missed this move, which is a winning move. Yeah, so thank you for Liliana. Yes, knight d4 is better than a knight to e5. And that was played in the game. We are going to take a look at this variation. It was in the game, but let's talk about rook e8 because rook e8 wins the game right away. For example, well, let's say this rook takes, d takes, this is a check. Well, they have to take, and then after queen f7, it's over. Well, I don't think there is a big difference. If the other rook takes, it's basically the same. So that's why here they cannot take. Maybe they will just ignore and continue with b4. But if that happens, then the move that suggested Brian works perfectly well. So the rook is already on e8, so the knight doesn't block this file, and the knight does attack on f7. So for example, I don't know what to play because queen f7 is the next move. Let's say queen e6 or what? Queen f6. Oh, queen f6, let's say, is a blunder. So who can tell me why queen f6 is a blunder? I think it's actually a very simple question. Rook takes f8. Okay. Rook takes f8. King takes f8. So Paul suggests queen takes f6. Liliana also suggests that queen takes f6 and rook c8. Okay, guys, even this move works. I'll show you. So rook f8. If the king takes on f8, then it's this, this. And after rook c8, they have this move or this move. If they play this move, it's simply knight c6. If they play king e7, then it's knight f7. Oh, wait, they take here. Okay, my mistake. No, it doesn't work. So the best way is just to take and continue with rook c8 like most of you suggested. Because then we are threatening to take the rook and also to promote. So, for example, if they take here, it's x-ray. And they have no ideas of how to defend. They can only bring the knight. But as we discussed in this position, if they do so, then we can continue with knight c6. They capture here, and after rook f8, they are just down a rook. Our task is just to not blunder the back rank mate on d1. That's it. So queen f6 doesn't work. Well, queen e6, queen e6, you can just take with the rook if you want, or you can take with the queen and then win the game with the same idea. Okay, so rook e8 did work. Knight d4 was played instead in the game. Queen goes to b6, and finally rook c8 was played. What move to play if not queen to b6? Well, to be honest, I don't know. seems to be completely winning. Well, maybe they can play g6. Then at least you can capture on b5 and the position becomes completely winning. So this is the reason why they play queen b6. They wanted to attack the rook. And if we capture with the knight, they can chase this knight away with a6. But after rook c8, it's over. Knight b7 to defend on d8. Knight c6. Well, and it's time to resign. The only thing that Black found here is this fork, which actually didn't work. Why this fork doesn't work? What do you think White can play in this position? Okay, rook e8 is suggested by Paul. So rook e8, okay, interesting. Well, what we may expect. Rook e8, knight f5. Then probably you take on d8. Yeah, actually, to be honest, it looks winning. Okay, rook e8. What about knight e8? Because if you take, I think I'm fine. So that means that you have to capture on d8. If you capture with the rook, then queen c6, and I'm threatening with the mate. So looks like it doesn't work. So you have to take with your knight. But if that happens, I can play knight f6. Or maybe not knight f6. What else do I have in this position? Ah, then I have knight d6 again. Yeah, actually nice. I have knight d6 again. Yeah, looks like it doesn't seem to be completely winning for white after rook e8. So it's not rook e8. Anything else? Rook d8. Yeah, rook d8. If knight takes f5, then rook takes f8, king takes f8. And then rook e8 is a mate. That's right. And if the king goes to h7, we just promote. Yes, exactly. This is correct. So rook d8 can be played here. If knight f5, then it's a check. If king takes, this is a mate. If the king goes away, then after d8, it's a completely winning position. However, after rook d8, they can simply capture with their queen, right? And then I think it's still a winning position because you can capture. They have to capture this queen. And then after rook e8, you win the game. And knight d6. Yeah, then knight d6, let's say. Rook 8. Do we have to play? Yeah, we do have to play this move. And then after knight c6, knight b7. Well, actually, it may be not winning. What does the engine say? The engine say black is winning even because of the passed pawn. Okay. So queen takes, knight takes f5. And how do we win? Maybe knight c6 right away? Yeah, knight c6 right away works. And then d8 equals queen. Yeah, okay, fine. So this works. However, in the game, it was knight d8. So it was even better. What happened then? Well, here, if rook takes, it's rook e8, right? Because knight takes, Queen takes, and this is a mate. Well, if the rook takes, it doesn't make any difference. If the queen takes, then they are down a queen, at least. So that's why knight f5 is the only move. And after knight f5, white simply wins with this knight c6. They are about to exchange the rooks and play d8. So it's actually quite similar to rook d8 move. Oh, I mean, it's quite similar to rook d8 move. And that variation when queen takes on d8, knight takes d8, knight goes there, and then knight c6 with the idea of promotion. So here it worked in the same way. Okay, this is where Petrosyan finally resigned. So what did happen in this game? So you may take a look at this moment when the pawn on a2 was sacrificed in order to create the d pawn as a far advanced passed pawn. Well, a far advanced passed pawn without any support may become the object of the attack and may be lost. But this time, this pawn has enough support and the enemy pieces are out of the place of action. For example, the queen and the knight are not located perfectly well. Ideally, Black would love to reach such a position with the knight on d6 and this knight defending with the queen from a3 or maybe from the rook on d8, something like that. And ideally without queens, because with queens on the board, white definitely have more tactical ideas of how to attack the king. Even if they do not promote, they at least may have in mind the ideas of checkmating the king with queen and knight activity by doing these moves. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the next example. This is the game between not so well-known chess players. Well, of course, Lev Polugaevsky, who was playing this game with black pieces, was strong enough. Well, he was one of the best Soviet players. And the guy he was playing against is not so popular. His name is Johannes Weltmander. But this time, black created a passed pawn. So it was a version of Binoni. This time, well, d6 is the most common move here, but g6 was played, and white initiated their own fiancetta, which is a very common strategy, but is not as good as e4, doing e4 right away. Castle, castle, rook e8 to stop e4, and well, in this position, there are several moves like knight d2, bishop f4, or a4 to stop b5. White chose knight e1, which is not the best continuation. So I thought that the idea is to play e4 actually, but it seems like not. Knight bd7, queen goes to c2. However, if they wanted to play e4, I think they could. Maybe they were afraid of something like b5. However, I'm not sure at the moment because, well, if e4, b5, knight takes here, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, there is knight d6. So e4 was definitely playable. Anyway, queen c2, a6, a4, that stops it. Rook b8 with the idea of doing b5. a5, what I think was a really good move, after which you may continue with b5 and take on b6 with the knight, activating your knight. Or you could just ignore and continue with knight e5. So b3 was played. Again, another maybe not the best way to develop pieces. The bishop goes to b2. However, this slow plan allows black to play b5 and reach what they were dreaming of when they started the game. A takes b5, a takes b5, bishop b2, and queen goes to b6. Well, why the queen goes to b6? Well, mainly because there are some ideas of the bishop attack after c4, b takes c4, b takes c4. Also, with this move, we connect the rook. So we may play bishop a6 because the bishop is now protected with the queen in case if we need it. h3, knight goes to e5, knight f3, and what would you play here? So knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and what then? Okay, Brian suggests c4. Well, I think that c4 is the main idea, of course. But before doing c4, you can instead gain a tempo. Let's gain a tempo. Okay, bishop f5. So yes, it's bishop f5. It would be great if you can explain why. Why bishop f5 works and what's wrong with e4. Yeah, okay. Well, after e4, white weakens the d4 square. Well, it's partially true, but there is definitely something wrong with e4 move, and you can take advantage of it. Knight takes d5. And if knight takes d5? Well, guys, there are two things why e4, I mean, at least two reasons why e4 isn't a good move in this position. Actually, you can find them both. One is simple, the other one is a bit more complicated. No ideas? Okay, knight takes f4, knight takes f3. Yes, Paul, thank you. Well, first of all, knight takes f3 right away, after which you can capture the pawn. This is the simplest reason. The second reason is knight takes e4. So then what? If, let's say, knight takes e5, then it's knight takes e3, and bishop takes here. So here the queen is attacked. That's why they have to take. After which you'd better continue. Well, one of the ideas is this, but bishop takes e4 first. The queen takes. Knight f3 is a check. Actually, yes. And after queen takes, it's bishop b2, and you gain a pawn. The pawn on e4. This bishop is useless, so that's why you have some chances with a pawn promotion after c4 and so on. Well, you can choose what you think is best. Either you take on e4 or you just take on f3 and capture the pawn on h3. Both lines are fine. Okay, so queen c1. Knight takes f3. If bishop takes, it's bishop takes h3. That's why they have to take with the pawn, which allows us to enter the enemy camp at a certain moment of the game where this knight goes away. And this bishop becomes even worse. And it's time to play c4. If they capture on c4, queen c7, for example, and then we can activate our pieces by doubling the rooks on the b file with the idea of playing c3 at a certain moment of the game. White continued with b4. And with this move, they allowed us to get a protected passed pawn. So strategically, black is already winning. They have a better pieces, and if they pass the game to the end game, one of the pieces has to be tied down to the c pawn. The game continued with bishop d3 with some initiative, rook a1. And how would you play in this position? I think this is the most critical moment of the game. Black has a passed pawn, but compared to the previous game, which we analyzed, where the opponent wasn't able to block this pawn. Here, white successfully blocks the pawn with their knight on c3. That's why, together with the passed pawn, black should do something else and combine this plan with something else. So what's something else you can suggest for black? What other way of playing here? What other plan you may suggest? So for those who is still watching our stream on YouTube, I kindly recommend to join our Zoom meeting. The link is provided in the comment section. So queen b7 seems interesting with the idea of doing what? To capture here? And then they react with f4, bringing the bishop to the game. Moreover, maybe they can wait until you take and then continue with f4, pinning your knight. This is a good idea too. So queen b7 is just a one-move attack, and they also have one-move defense.
Knight h5 with bishop d4 coming.
Knight h5 and bishop d4. I think knight h5 is already enough because the g3 is hanging and there is nothing that may stop the spin. Because if the king goes to h2 or to h1 to avoid it, it's simply queen f2. So how do they stop? Because the rook a3 doesn't work. We just exchange on a3 and capture on g3. That's why they continued with this move, knight a4, trying to protect it, hoping that white exchanges the bishops. But what do you think is the best way to continue here? Well, the most simple is just this, take on b2, queen takes b2, and knight g3. And black is better. Maybe not winning, but definitely much better. However, instead of taking on e4 with the bishop right away, I want you to suggest a better move.
c3.
Oh, c3, interesting. I didn't analyze it. Liliana suggests rook e4 also to sacrifice the exchange like Petrosyan. Well, interesting idea. We should look at both these moves. Okay, so let's first decide whether c3 works. No, I didn't actually analyze c3 myself. Well, c3, what if bishop c3? Then rook c8?
One of the rooks, yeah.
Well, maybe the other rook to c8. Well, okay, let's say this rook to c8. Queen b2. Well, it seems that you don't have time to capture on g3. You may take on e4, but then I take on g7 first. And I think the knight has to take on g7. Otherwise, there are so many weak squares. Sorry, what did you want to say?
Bishop takes c3.
Bishop takes c3. Yeah, okay. Bishop takes c3.
Here.
Knight takes c3, and then knight takes g3, I think, right? But you sacrifice the pawn and you gain the pawn back. Of course, your pieces are better, but is it the best way? I doubt. You could at least capture this pawn with bishop e4, knight g3 idea. Okay, and let's talk about rook e4 sacrifice. It looks interesting. So rook e4, they have to take, and maybe then knight g3. Well, let's decide if we need to include this move or not. Maybe not, because the position of the queen on c1 is more vulnerable because of this fork on e2. However, I think they take, and then they continue with queen b2. So maybe the king goes back. Well, to be honest, I don't see the compensation here for the exchange sacrificed. Any other suggestions? Rook ec8. Well, it's a bit slow, to be honest. f5. Well, come on, guys. So you can actually do well, in the game it was bishop b2, queen takes b2, bishop takes e4, and then knight takes g3, which was just a very simple way to obtain advantage. But it was much better if black played this move, knight g3. How this move works. So which lines do we need to calculate? Knight takes knight and bishop takes g7, of course. If knight takes knight, then the queen is overloaded and we have a bishop pair. And we can also continue with this move. And it's now easier to promote the pawn. And maybe the rook is in a danger. We can try to trap it. For example, if rook d1, it's this. And after this move, it's just simply bishop c3. So after bishop b2, the rook has to go to a2, but then c3. And it seems to be winning because c2 is coming. Maybe first we're going to play this move, then c2, c1. So knight g3 doesn't work. Okay, what if they play bishop g7 first? If they play bishop g7 first, then we first take on e4. And because we are threatening to take on f2, they cannot save their bishop. That's why f takes e4 and king takes on g7. And this time we have the bishop on d3, which is better than the knight on g3. e4 is vulnerable, the bishop is still restricted, and c3 is always coming. So that was the best way to play. Knight takes g3. The game continued with this, and well, just imagine that we could have a bishop on d3 instead of the knight on g3. Well, doing something like this and king g2 would be a good idea. In such a case, the game would continue with rook e5, king g2, so now the knight is hanging, knight h5, and after they take, queen f6, maybe there is a kind of a compensation. Not a full compensation, but maybe some. Because this is a weakness, the king is weak, e5 is coming, then maybe d6 becomes dangerous, while the c-pawn cannot be promoted right away. So that was the best way for white to play, but they played e5 immediately. D takes e5, rook takes e5, and now please find the best move for black. Okay. Okay, Paul, thank you. I think you mean C3. Yeah, C3. Okay. Exactly. C3. So this is the way of how we break the connection between enemy pieces. So the idea is that once they take with the queen, it's simply knight e2 and they have to give up the exchange. If it's rook e8 like it was played in the game, then the rook takes and the pawn cannot be captured, so they have to play queen c2. But after queen c2, the pawn is protected, so we deliver a check, king goes to f1, and now it's a winning position. We can just play queen here, threatening with, well, queen h2 is not really a threat. There is not much to do there, but b4 is a threat. Of course, of course, here white is losing, but they don't need to lose. In the game, they played rook a1 and lost the game immediately. But let's say they played rook b1, defending the pawn on b4. What your plan here would be? What do you think? Mm, no, the knight is already on e2.
Queen h2 and knight f4.
Actually, queen h2 and queen g1.
Oh.
Yeah, I think you're right. So actually, queen h2 is a threat because how do they stop it? Bishop f4 maybe. Oh, bishop f4 has some other disadvantages. At least you can play, well, knight f4 maybe, yeah. Or queen h3 first doesn't make much sense. Well, I think we can just play this move because if they take the pawn, we take the bishop, and queen c1 doesn't make any sense. Just king to g7. I mean, queen c8 doesn't make sense. So, and if they play queen d3, then we may continue with c2. c2, rook c1. No, I don't see how to win here. Let's go back. So queen h2, bishop e4. Well, what do you think about this? The pawn is still protected. f3 is likely to be a blunder. Just f takes queen g2 and then f takes e4. Okay, we will check it out. I mean, we will check rook e2 move instead of knight e2. Yeah, well, seems to be winning. Okay, let's check what the engine says. Yeah, completely winning. Yeah, so maybe, but not sure if that was the best way to play. What does the engine suggest here? Yes, bishop f4. Okay, bishop f4 and knight goes there. And if they take, okay, they just lose here. And we are about to take here. Okay, fine. However, my line is also winning. Okay, let's go back, and instead of knight e2, or instead of knight e2 in this position, let's play rook e2. Rook e2, and if queen takes c3, it's queen f2. But the problem of this move is that they have an intermediate check, and then they capture on c3 with a check and simply take on g3. So they defend the position. Knight c3 was actually, oh, knight to e2 was actually a clever move. Rook e2 didn't work. So they played rook e1 and they lost the game immediately, but how? Who may tell me? Queen takes b4. Well, not sure about queen takes b4. Queen takes b4, rook takes e2. How do you win? Looks like queen takes b4 is a mistake. Yeah, it's definitely a mistake. Well, you can try queen h2. Well, but I think it's a mistake too because they capture on e2. Okay, so queen b4, rook takes e2, and you take, and they take with the king. Then you suggest this move, but well, just bishop e4. You may try to advance your pawns, but I don't care. I push my pawn, b3, then queen takes b2. The bishop can successfully stop both pawns, but you cannot stop d7. Well, okay, I'll give you a hint. At this moment, Black initiated a tactical strike in order to distract the white pieces to get the pawn promoted. Thanks to Liliana, yes, it's knight g3. Yeah, exactly. Knight g3, f takes g3, queen f6. So Paul was also able to come up with it. Knight g3. So they cannot move their king because of rook e1. It's obvious. And after this move, it's queen f6. The point is that we distract the king from the rook. If the king g1, we just take the rook and win the game. Well, bishop f3 doesn't deserve any attention. So queen f2 is the only move. However, after this move, we exchange the rooks, then the queens, and they cannot stop our pawn. And that's it. So this is a good example where pieces were sacrificed in order to get the pawn promoted. So this is how a passed pawn may help you. Well, first of all, you may combine the idea of a passed pawn, of promoting the passed pawn with some kingside activity, like you did in this case, like Black did in this case with knight h5, knight g3. So there was an attack on f2. The g3 pawn was hanging because of that, and there was nothing they could do in order to save it. So, because you see, right now you cannot promote the pawn. You have to create something else. You have to create an attack. f2 is a weakness, g3 is a weakness. That was the reason why they tried to attack it with knight h5 move. And later, at a certain moment of the game, the idea of the kingside attack was combined with c-pawn march. Now white pieces has to stop the c-pawn. And then, while you see that you cannot get the c-pawn advanced, you may focus on something else in the position because their pieces are passive. So knight e2, and you bring the queen to a better spot. That's it. And then distraction of the enemy pieces in order to promote the passed pawn. So the passed pawn is a very important and very strong if you are able to coordinate your pieces activity with the idea of the pawn promotion. Okay, so we have one more game to analyze today. This one. I don't think you know these guys. Dragalub Velimirovich and Itzvan Tsom. Let's quickly go through it, and maybe you have a chance to learn something else. By the way, I think this conference is recorded. So if you want to see the recording, you can always message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. So if you need the recording, you can message me. I'll send you the link. Let's start with the analysis. So e4, c5, d6, d4. So knight f6. So it's not a very common move. I was surprised that black plays this, but then I realized that actually the best way is to continue with knight c3, which is just a transposition. Well, and then it was neither. So the pawn goes to a6, and white chose the most common way to fight against neither. It's bishop c4, and the line is transposed to Scheveningen. Bishop b3, bishop e7, bishop e3, knight c6. White wants to castle queenside. That's why they continue with queen e2, queen c7, castle queenside, castle kingside. King b1 is a prophylaxis to avoid pressure on the c file. And black plays b5. Well, it definitely does make sense to continue with g4, but this idea can be considered too risky. So first, knight takes c6, queen takes c6, and instead of doing this kingside attack, which I think most of you would do, white decides to play positionally and to play in the center. They played this move, bishop d4. Well, e4 was hanging, so that was the way to protect on e4. Who can tell me what's wrong with this move, e5?
Knight d5.
Yeah, exactly. It's knight d5. Knight d5 creates a threat of a fork. That's why, well, the bishop is not hanging on d4, so they may exchange, but this time it's bishop d5 and the rook is hanging behind. They may not exchange. They may retreat with the queen, let's say to b7 maybe. Well, then knight f6, bishop f6, bishop d5 anyway. Even at least just bishop c3 was fine. So bishop b7 first, rook h e1, queen goes to c7 back, some prophylaxis with a3, rook goes to c8, and white wants to fight for the center with f4, and this is where black decided to play e5. Take, and now your turn. Well, if you just continue with bishop g1, I would say it's equal. For example, black may continue with bishop c5 and exchange the bishops. What is the best way to play for a win here for white? How does it how does it correspond with our topic today, a passed pawn? Okay, so here Peter suggests 95 move. Well, yeah, this is a good move, but this move is a very responsible idea. And actually, it works. How does it work? Knight d5, and what happens then? So if they take with a knight, e takes d5, and we are threatening to take the pawn on e5. There is no way to save it. If f6, then d6 with a discovery check. So the only thing they can do is just to take. But then after queen e7, the pawn on d4 is a weakness. d5 is a passed pawn. And this activity on the 7th rank is also important. That's why in the game, instead of knight takes d5, black played bishop d5. E takes d5. Again, it's the same trouble with this pawn. Neither this nor that helps. So e takes d4 is a must. Queen e7. But this time, because there is no bishop on b7, queen h2 is possible. The game continued with d6. Well, why d6? First of all, we get our pawn closer to the queen in square. Second, we activate the bishop. So when you have a passed pawn, you shouldn't forget about everything else and only focus on the promotion. You should get all of your pieces coordinated. The idea of this move is that now rook e8 doesn't work. For rook e8, it's bishop f7, bishop takes here. Well, actually, here black decided to play with the other rook, having in mind that here they take with the rook on f7 and they thought it's fine. Well, what would you play?
Looks like D7.
D7, a very responsible decision. D7, rook takes D7. How does it work?
Rook takes D7.
Rook takes E7, but then I think I can sacrifice the knight. This is how I get the queen for rook and knight. So D7, rook E7. Rook takes E7, knight D7. I'm fine with it. Then maybe G6. Oh, rook F7 is a move. Okay. Okay, so H5. Rook F7, I may take, and after rook F1, I just don't care and let you take the rook on F7, but my pass pawn on the H file becomes dangerous because I definitely get rid of your G pawn. Okay, so there is a good suggestion by Liliana regarding bishop takes F7. So bishop takes F7 works right away. So moving the king is a blunder. That's why rook takes F7. And white sacrifices the queen. Black blocks, but then D7, and there is a threat of D8. How can black stop this? What about, let's say, queen B8? Queen H4 suggested by Brian. Well, yeah, queen H4 I think is also possible. But okay, let's talk about queen B8 first. I can make this move on the board. So how do you deal with it? Well, of course you may say rook takes queen, but then rook takes rook. Then rook d4. However, the black rook stops it, and the king comes closer to help to capture this pawn, and maybe white is not winning. Rook d to e1, and if king f7. Oh, Brian, in this position, rook f1 doesn't work. They just simply take on e8. Rook d1 makes more sense because this is how e8 rook is protected. But with king f7, they add another attacker. So how do we continue after king f7? I still believe it's winning. Okay. Well, rook takes d4 in this position. Okay, rook takes d4 in this position. They can play rook e8. So I think this is the move. And after king f7, rook f1 wins the game, correct. Then you take here. And then promote. So queen b8 doesn't work. Queen h4 doesn't work neither. But let's make the move that was played in the game, queen d6. It is better than queen h4. It also covers the d8 square, protects the pawn on d4, and attacks the pawn, comparing to queen h4, which doesn't attack the pawn on d7. How to deal with queen d6, the move that was played in the game. After the next move, black resigned. Okay, yeah, queen d6 is refuted by rook f1. With the same idea, with the idea of a checkmate on f8. Well, the only way to save is g6, but then it's just rook f8 and d8 on the next move. So here, black resigned. This is actually one of the famous positions that you may see in the books with puzzles. I think almost every books that contains puzzles has this position. So that is the end of the game. So let's take a look at this situation once again. So, well, white played positionally instead of initiating. White plays positionally instead of initiating a kingside attack. They are prepared for some tactical battle in the center, but black starts first. They first play this move and allow white to get the control over the d5 square. And based on this pin, white is able to initiate a tactical strike. So maybe it was better to do something like 98, 96 in this position. But then black would be a pawn down and would definitely lose the game. Not immediately, but maybe in 20 more moves. However, black decided to play for the initiative. They took on h2 with the idea of taking on g2, and d6 allowed white to activate their bishop. So here again, the pawn activity was combined with pieces coordination and the kingside attack. So what makes this a famous position? This tactical strike, which is a very nice tactical strike, because you have to sacrifice the queen, and then after d7, you are a queen down. With d7, you make a kind of a slow move. Then they, for example, can play queen b8 or queen d6. And before doing this bishop f7 sacrifice, you should make sure that you win the game. And because of the beauty of this combination, the position is famous. Okay, fine, guys. So today we had a webinar in Zoom. Please let me know if it was better than our regular webinars that we do by streaming it on YouTube, on Chesslands, and on Twitch. So we had about 14 participants today, 13, about 13 in average, I think. Okay, so this is much better because it goes smoothly. There is there were no problems with internet connection this time. This webinar was streamed to YouTube and Chesslands as well, but I think if you're watching it on YouTube, you were watching it with a delay of 20 seconds, and maybe the quality wasn't so good. So everybody together, yeah. So well, the internet is absolutely the same. The only reason why it went smoothly is that Zoom works smoothly than all this streaming equipment altogether. So if you have any suggestions of how we can get more people involved, so for example, today there were 14 people. Is there anything that we can do to increase our room to 50 people? So of course, we have Zoom allows us to get 200 students simultaneously. So, but I at least want to get 50 participants on each webinar. If you have any suggestions of how can I do it, please let me know. Anyway, we're gonna meet next week, and it will be the same Zoom meeting. No, not the same. I will make another Zoom meeting. It will be a new link. So guys, make sure that your microphones work.
Testing, testing.
Yes, it does work. So, and then we will be able to use voice, which makes our interaction more simple. Because when you have to type these different lines, it takes time. You may misspell something, and like when you are explaining the line with your voice, it's easier. We can discuss it right away, and there is no delay. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Please share it with your friends. I'll send an email regarding the next event, regarding the event we're gonna have next Sunday. So the email will be sent on Wednesday or Thursday. Okay, perfect, guys. So thank you for coming, and hope to see everyone next Sunday, same time. Good luck with your chess games. Bye-bye.